last week. Why don't we start with Odell Beckham Jr., who's going to be inactive again for the second straight week? And what are the fantasy implications when it comes to the wide receiver spot for the Browns ahead of this game today?
I actually think the way the Browns handled it this week is going to be more beneficial to fantasy owners, because last week Odell Beckham Jr. was game planned the whole week to play, even right up to practice. At the very last minute, it was like, that ACL, that knee, we're going to pump the brakes. Now, one of the benefactors of that was Anthony Schwartz, a rookie who has real life track and field speed, guys, like Olympic level. Like he was like borderline Olympian speed, but he could also catch, and he was used in that sort of Tyreek Hill gadget type way with a 17-yard end-around handoff, 44-yard downfield. So this week, what they did was rule out OBJ early. They said he's not playing. We're gonna bench him for this week to relax. That means I believe Schwartz is going to be a sneaky flex play this week, and he's going to benefit from a whole week game plan around him. And really what that means is he's the only field stretcher. We love Jarvis, Landry, and Njoku and all that, but he's the speed guy that can keep defenses honest and not crowding the line. So a flex spot, maybe some DraftKings as well, DFS, that's where I think you can get a real value out of an Anthony Schwartz.
DJ, Jarvis Landry is getting a lot of love online this week with no Odell Beckham Jr. He's historically averaged, I believe it's around 16 points per game, PPR-wise, when OBJ doesn't play. What do you think when it comes to Jarvis Landry and what he can do today on the field for the Browns?
I love Landry. Got him on a bunch of teams. I've actually added Schwartz to a couple teams just because, man, if Odell still can't get on the field in week 2 after an offseason, I wonder if that's going to be an ongoing issue. And so he might be someone that you want to stash now while you can get him. And you're right. So many targets for Schwartz early let me know that the coaching staff has a lot of confidence in him. But Baker Mayfield, we know, has a lot of confidence in Jarvis Landry. When in trouble, that's where he looks. So specifically in PPR leagues, when he's such a good guy in possession over the middle, I think that's the guy you want because he's so consistent, right? You're going to have some receivers, certainly. And fantasy right now, there's such great depth in the receiver spot. If we're talking about, even 3 receiver leagues, you want someone that I can set them and they're going to get me double-digit points. I don't even have to look at it. They're not going to be boom and bust like a Julio Jones, but they might get you 25 or they might get you 5. Landry is going to be a solid singles hitter for you, and ultimately, as you accrue points every week, that's what you want.
Deej, you mentioned depth at the receiver position. There's no doubt there's depth at the receiver position, but when it comes to the running back situation, it seems like every year we're in fantasy, it continues to get thinner and thinner in terms of who the bell cows are in the backfield. One running back that will not play today, inactive, is Josh Jacobs. He's out for the Raiders, toe and ankle issues. What does that mean for the Raiders backfield? I know a lot of people pretty high on Kenyon Drake, but as a previous, I used to have Kenyon Drake on my roster, and it was an underwhelming season last year, to say the least. So can we really expect something significant from Kenyon Drake today with Jacobs out?
Well, he's going to get some carries. He's going to be the lead back. They've talked in Vegas about how much they love Peyton Barber. So you could see him cannibalize a little bit around the goal line, but they also spent a lot of money to bring in Kenyon Drake after they had Josh Jacobs. And Jacobs looked good, looked spry to start the year. But yeah, I think, am I comfortable with him as an RB2? Maybe not. Because I just don't really know what you're going to get from that Raiders offense from week to week. But in a flex spot, if the projections are close between him and another receiver, I think Kenyon Drake's in a good spot right there.
We got a question coming in here. Ariel Jacobs on YouTube for the flex wants to know Brandon Cooks, Chase Edmonds, Antonio Brown, Eli Mitchell, Robbie Anderson, PPR. Now, Andy, Eli Mitchell's involved in that. So before we answer the question for Ariel Jacobs, I think it is important to ask what's going on in this Niners backfield, because Trey Sermon, now it seems like he will be active. The biggest surprise I remember watching, I wasn't with you guys last week, but I watched you guys last week. And when Donnovan said that Trey Sermon was going to be inactive, your reaction, just the eyebrows went up, the eyes were popping out of their head, because everybody was expecting Trey Sermon to get the bulk of the carries for the 49ers. But that was not the case. He will be active today. People spent $1 billion in fab on Eli Mitchell. So what's going on in the Niners backfield, and what's going on with Kyle Shanahan? Because this seems to be a trend with Shanahan when it comes to running backs.
Oh, when it comes to running backs, Kyle Shanahan hates your fantasy football team, kids. He hates it. He hates it. And that was shocking last week because we had heard nothing out of camp that there was a problem with Trey Sermon. All of a sudden, Shanahan's like, it wasn't that good. Like, well, that would have been helpful a little while ago, Kyle. Thanks.
You heard the opposite in camp, quite frankly.
Yes! You heard the opposite. Exactly. So all of a sudden, Eli Mitchell, 6th-round rookie, who nobody had. If you say you had Eli Mitchell on your radar, you're a liar. But he popped out of nowhere, 104 yards and a touchdown. Comes out earlier this morning. He will get, quote, lead back duties today. Okay. I'm with you guys. I don't fully trust Kyle Shanahan because we know he loves a rotation. Now, that doesn't mean that the running backs cannot be fantasy relevant. Trey Sermon, there is draft capital. You have to follow the money and follow the draft capital. Trey Sermon's going to get a look. If Eli Mitchell starts quick, maybe that's a case where they keep going today and he's worked in slowly. But long term, that's why you don't spend your entire fab at the start of the year. I know running back's thin, but that seemed like a bit much.
Yeah, just circling back on that question. So Eli Mitchell was in there. Ariel Jacobs on YouTube for Flex. Deej, I'll circle back to you. Brandon Cooks, Chase Edmonds, Antonio Brown, Eli Mitchell, Robbie Anderson. It is a full PPR league. Who do you like there?
First of all, if these are the options in Flex, who do you have in your starting spots? Like
Must
it's
be
a
right
PPR league with 4 people in it. I like Chase Edmonds. I like anyone in that Arizona offense, quite frankly. Eli Mitchell really, shouldn't be in this conversation yet. Deebo Samuel makes sense, but I think I heard Antonio Brown in that conversation.
Yes.
And over his last 4 games, he's been one of the best receivers in fantasy. Now, he's not Antonio Brown's of 3, 4, 5 years ago, but give me a receiver that a quarterback really is invested in and wants to see do well. Tom Brady had Antonio Brown in his house. Yeah. Like, when everything is even, sorry, Mike Evans owners, sorry, Chris Godwin owners, when everybody's open, he's taking the ball to Antonio Brown time and time again. And so for me, I think Brown amongst those names is the person you want to start.
Yeah, it seems like Antonio Brown has found the fountain of youth a little bit, Andy.
Yeah, I think it definitely you go with Antonio Brown here. Now, again, the options are great. Brandon Cooks, garbage time. You're going to be fine there. I think you definitely take out Edmonds, Mitchell, Anderson in that for that particular situation. And I think, you go, like Donnovan said, you go with Antonio Brown. Who's the quarterback like? Who's he going to? Big play Antonio Brown. Keep going. Gronk the same. Like, go with who Tom Brady likes.
It's just crazy to think about where a lot of people would have gotten Antonio Brown in their fantasy drafts and the potential output that Antonio Brown could have this year. Live with Tom Brady. We know what he's capable of. We've seen what he's capable of with the Steelers in the past, and it's just a matter of finding that chemistry with Brady. It appears like they've certainly found something. Okay, Knight has a question on YouTube.
Let me just say, in terms of the Bucs, because we learned this early in week 1, and I didn't, want to draft Antonio Brown because I just didn't really want to cheer for him for a year. But when you look at that talented offense, week 1, who did Brady force the ball to? Gronkowski, Brown. 2 guys who he forced basically to come with him to Tampa Bay. So I think when in doubt, those are plays that are going to be consistent ones out of Tampa Bay.
This is a good question from Knight on YouTube. Najee Harris or DJ Moore to start in week 2. Now, a lot of people were very high on Najee Harris coming into the season. And this is, I think, a guy who's in a sort of a buy low candidate here because he's getting the looks. He's basically alone in the Steelers' backfield. It didn't go so well week 1, but there's no question the talent's there and the reps are there. What say you, Andy? Najee Harris or DJ Moore?
Boy, the opportunities, like you said, the opportunities are going to be there for Najee Harris. At the very least, it's not like a situation in Baltimore where there could be a variety of opportunities. If the Pittsburgh Steelers are running the football, it's going to Najee Harris. Now, last week, the game script didn't really allow for that too much. And remember, Pittsburgh has 4 new offensive linemen, which didn't look all that great to me when it came to helping to run the football. So I'm going to go with Moore this week. I think long-term, like if it's a case where you need Harrison, you drafted him because the running back position is so thin, absolutely. Put him in with confidence because you probably don't have a better solution. But I really like DJ Moore this season and this week.
TJ, you taking DJ because of the DJ in his name? What's going on?
No, man, I'm partial to lead running backs. I'm partial to running backs, period, quite frankly. But, there was one other skill position player that got a carry week 1 against the Buffalo Bills. It was Canadian Chase Claypool, who broke off for 25 yards. But I'm loyal to the person who's going to be getting the reverse pivot from Ben Roethlisberger. The issue is they only ran the ball 6 times, which I think they're going to correct this week. I expect Harris to get 20 carries and be a factor in the pass game, so I like Harris in the spot.
You mentioned Claypool there, and I think that the Steelers' receiving situation is a little bit tricky, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that because a lot of people expecting another jump from Chase Claypool based on what they saw from him as a rookie, super athletic, but are the reps going to be there? Are the targets going to be there? Because it seems like Juju Smith-Schuster in that offense is a little bit of a safety valve, and so is Deontay Johnson, quite frankly, and they're going to try and get the ball to Najee Harris. So is there a ceiling? Is Claypool capped, Andy, just based on how much the Steelers like to spread the ball around?
I think he is, and that's no knock against Chase Claypool. Like you said, uber talented, super athletic. Ben if he was on this team 5 years ago, Ben Roethlisberger, I think Chase Claypool would be a surefire WR1 without a shadow of a doubt. But this is 2021 Ben Roethlisberger, whose arm looks like it's about ready to fall off, and he's dink and dunking it again, like we saw last year, to Deontay Johnson and the safety valve of Juju. We're going to see weeks where Chase Claypool makes a spectacular play. We saw it last week with that 25-yard run. Is there enough to be relevant? Also, you're mixing in Eric Ebron at tight end, who's going to be active this week. So that's another mouth to feed. I just think it's a little bit too much. So until we see how that ball distribution gets sorted, and if we can find any sort of pattern that improves Claypool's standing, right now, to me, you got to consider him in the flex category with a ceiling higher than any wide receiver on that team. But you just don't know right now. And I hate roller coasters in fantasy, the ups and downs. I think that's what we're going to be seeing with Chase Claypool to start the year.
It's a great point. Okay, shifting to another question. Dylan on YouTube wants to know, Tyler Higbee or Mark Andrews? Now, Tyler Higbee is an interesting one because he was held back a little bit last year just because of the reps that he was getting at tight end. Gerald Everett was there. Gerald Everett's not there anymore. Tyler Higbee got 100% of the snaps last week and is a boom candidate. So, DJ, Tyler Higbee or Mark Andrews? A lot of people would have Mark Andrews closer to the upper echelon of tight ends, but Tyler Higbee is certainly climbing those ranks, no?
He is, and I really like him, and I like him in that offense. I think he's a better player. I just think when you look at the situation, Andrews is a bit more of a safer play because as of right now, the last I've seen, Marquise Brown questionable to play. He's not available for Lamar Jackson in a situation where a lot of their skill position players are hurt to begin with. I just feel like they're going to need to force the ball to Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews has made a lot of drops in high leverage situations, which are not great for him as a football player and makes us a little bit down on him, but has nothing to do with his fantasy value. And I think he's going to be, whether it's through the air, over the middle for Lamar, specifically if Marquise Brown isn't healthy, their number one target. Where Higbee, there are a lot of other places where the ball can go in that offense. So that's why I would lean to Andrews, even though if I was starting a football team, I would much prefer to have Higbee on my team right now.
Andy, where are you at with that one?
Yeah, I'm with Donnovan on that, especially if Brown is out. Andrews is the favorite target overall for Lamar Jackson. He is. Higbee, long-term for the season, I love it. I think he could be a top 5-6 tight end, no problem. But I thought Matt Stafford focusing so much attention on Cooper Kupp was surprising in the sense that we saw Kupp used in a different way than we were used to under Jared Goff just out of the slot. He was stretching the field. So now we're opening up that offense. And yeah, Higbee had 5 catches. So right now, I think we're looking at Higbee a little bit as a touchdown-dependent tight end to make your fantasy day go well at that position. Whereas if Brown sits or is limited, I believe the target share is going to be higher today for Baltimore. Remember, too, it's against Kansas City, so you're almost guaranteed a shootout, which means more passing opportunities.
Yes. Can we talk about the Rams for just a second? Because a lot of people were high on them coming into the year, but I'm not sure people were as high as they are right now after that week 1 performance and actually seeing Matt Stafford and his accuracy and what he's capable of doing with those weapons. I think I snagged them at, we're talking bets. I think their over-under for wins in the season was 10.5. And I got to say, I'm feeling pretty darn good about 10.5 after week 1. Were you surprised, DJ, at how good the Rams look? Are they up there in the upper echelon in terms of Super Bowl contenders? I know it's just 1 week and we tend to overreact, but they look pretty good.
Yeah, NFC West is pretty stacked, and I like the Rams coming out of it. And because it's so stacked, you're going to get good value on that bet. I said early, if you want a return on investment MVP candidate to sprinkle some money on, Matt Stafford might be your guy because they're going to win double-digit games, and he's going to have the narrative going for him. And he's a guy who statistically has always been pretty good. So that's not going to be an issue. Now you get him better playmakers. You get him on national TV, and you get him a great coach and a great play caller. Sean McVay finally has the kids out of the home.
Yeah.
He's traded in that minivan. He's got a nice little sports car. He's going downtown with his wife. They're eating out. He's living life on the other side because he's got a person who can make all the throws and can be a little bit of a coach on the field. So whether it's the Rams as a play, whether it's the Rams early in terms of games that they're involved with and potentially taking the over on the amount of points that they're going to score, or if it's Rams skill position players. You talked about Cooper Kupp. Andy last week told people, get you some Jefferson, and we saw already why. I love the Rams early while people are still sleeping on them. And a big part of having good offense is having a great defense. They give you great field position. They're going to turn the ball over and basically put points on your lap. And the Rams, for me, again, have one of the best defenses in football.
Andy, how impressed were you with the Rams? They certainly look like definitely a top 5 team in the league after 1 week. It's just 1 week. Again, I got to caveat that because everyone's going to jump down your throat when you make overreactions after 1 week, but they look good.
Matt Stafford looked as close to perfect as you could get. Efficient, high yardage, didn't turn the ball over. He looked thinner, he looked healthier, like the LA Sun's doing him well. He's out of Detroit. Like he just looks like he's happy, and the way they're able to distribute the ball. Now, the running game, I'm not in love with, but all the pass catching options are phenomenal. So I think we look against Indianapolis. This will be a nice test because it's another difficult defense. So they overcame Chicago in week 1. Indy's tricky. You got Tampa Bay coming up. Then there's Arizona. Like it's a bit until week 6 when you play the Giants. It's challenging. So I feel we're going to find out pretty quick what this Rams team is. And if you're sitting going into week 6 at 4-1, and you're after that, you're 4 or 5 wins, I think you have to consider them a contender. I'm a true believer. That performance looked like the real deal. That did not look like any sort of fluke. That looked like a guy who was tuned in and knows this offense.
All right, getting back to some questions online. Adam on Facebook wants to know, start Miles Sanders or Pascal, which I guess it's Zach Pascal in my flex. Miles Sanders or Zach Pascal? DJ.
I think it's Miles Sanders. I don't think it's even really close. You got, I know he's been pretty variable over his career and has some great fantasy weeks and some quiet ones, but you have a guy in a looks like a much better offense with quarterback certainly is confident. That zone run, RPO game is going to give Miles Sanders some big gaps now that he's got Jalen Hurts as a threat to tie down some defensive ends. So give me a starting running back that can make an impression in the pass game over, a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. I'm taking that RB1 all the time.
I love that. Andy, you feel the same way?
Yeah, and I understand the question because Zach Pascal scored 2 touchdowns last week. So it's like, whoa, okay, is this Carson Wentz's new favorite toy? You're also playing the Rams. As we talked about before, that's a pretty high-end defense there. Can I trust Pascal to be a week-in, week-out producer? I cannot. Do I want him on my team as a bench depth guy that I can slide in once in a while during a bug? Yeah. But Miles Sanders, definitely the play. Boston Scott was a non-factor. Kenneth Gainwell, the rookie, came and did vulture a touchdown, so we'll have to track how that usage plays out. But for this week specifically, I think Miles Sanders is the play.
I think that opens up a door for us to talk a little bit about the Philadelphia Eagles and how impressive they looked in week 1 as well. Jalen Hurts is out there as sort of a dark horse MVP candidate. I know, again, it's just week one, but they looked very, very impressive. They got that connection with Devontae Smith, it seems like. So, DJ, what can we expect from the Eagles when it comes to the running back situation? I know Sanders is going to get a lot of love, but Kenneth Gainwell is just sitting there kind of lurking in the background as absorbing that Boston Scott volume from last year. Is he someone who you should stash on the bench as of right now, or is he someone that is a viable flex play just based on absorbing that volume from Scott?
I think it's a stash on the bench, not a flex play yet, and it's early in the season. So I really think you're stashing him on the bench if you've got Sanders on your team, and you can handcuff the two. If Sanders goes down due to injury, you know you've got his replacement. You can keep that value. I love what I've seen from the Eagles. If you want to make an early, offensive rookie of the year bet, Smith might be that guy because he certainly was early in the read progression pretty often for a rookie. And we've seen over the last 3, 4, 5 years, rookie receivers have had some monster seasons, and I think Smith will be that guy this year. I also really loved what I saw from Sirianni in terms of how they looked on offense, just his control of the sideline. So there's always the question, who's going to win the NFC least? Is it going to be, no one thinks it's going to be the Giants anytime soon, but is Washington in that defense? And the Cowboys get so much press and they have so many good offensive players. Don't sleep on the Eagles to be a playoff team coming out of that division.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are still underestimating the Eagles just based on the disappointment of last year. But Andy, there is an outside chance here that Jalen Hurts could potentially be maybe a league winner when it comes to the quarterback position. Some people probably reach for him in the draft, but other drafts you were able to get him a little bit later, that next tier of quarterback. So can Jalen Hurts really be the difference maker for fantasy leagues this season? Because he certainly looked like with the dual threat ability, he could be one in week one.
Oh, Jesse, I think so. I really do. And I've been a believer on Sportsnet shows, Sportsnet.ca articles, all before the draft, before he was drafted 2 years ago, that Jalen Hurts is an underrated passer of the football. People wanted to write him off as a running quarterback. Not true. Not true. He's a leader. His completion percentage was in the high 60s. You look last year, he came in, COVID year, out of nowhere, Philadelphia was in shambles, and people say, well, Andy, look at the completion percentage. Watch the game. Why was his completion percentage lower? Because he was a cerebral quarterback and he threw the football away instead of taking 50 sacks like Carson Wentz did behind a terrible O-line. Smart. Not going Superman like a lot of rookies do. And what did we see last week? He's a guy. This is what I look at for mobile quarterbacks, guys. Do you look to run or can you run? Difference. 3 passing touchdowns. He looks to pass first and he can use his leg to get out of trouble or extend the play a la Russell Wilson. Jalen Hurts is the real deal. I think he MVP candidate and a guy who can win your fantasy team. And I'm glad I got him on one of my fantasy teams.
Love it.
It's all about value, and sometimes we have to reimagine how we value and think of players because they've been branded. Remember, Hurts lost his job to Tua, had to leave the program, was a second-round pick. When you look at what he did at Oklahoma, passing the football specifically, stacks up with what Kyler Murray did, stacks up and probably is better than what Baker Mayfield did. If Jalen Hurts is taken in the first round and is doing what he's doing right now, we're calling him Justin Herbert. Like, we were all over him. We're in love with him. But because he was a second-round pick, because we've seen other high-profile quarterbacks really, being taken in front of him, we're not all the way there yet. But to your point, he's an impact player in the NFL already.
The MVP award, a lot of times, guys, is a narrative award. We see this in every single league. And Jalen Hurts' jerseys are flying off the shelves everywhere. I saw the report from Fansided. I think his jersey sales are up like 5,000% after the week one performance. So no doubt, if you're looking for a value bet when it comes to the MVP, you better get on the train quick, because if he has another couple of good games here, Jalen Hurts' odds are going to be lower and lower. When it comes to another question from YouTube, Spencer, Jacoby Myers or Juju Smith-Schuster in half PPR flex. Now, a lot of people were pretty impressed with what Mac Jones brought to the table. He was very impressive in the preseason, and that sort of spilled over. And Jacoby Myers was a favorite target of Mac Jones. So, DJ, do we like Jacoby Myers or Juju Smith-Schuster in a half PPR today?
I think I like, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I like Juju Smith-Schuster as a player. I just don't like his situation because he's sharing targets with two other pretty good receivers, and he's got a quarterback who only completed 18 balls in week one. And so Mac Jones, I think, is going to be throwing early and often. He's shown that, Jacoby Myers is, in terms of the wide receivers on that team, his favorite target. Now, by the end of the year, his tight ends might end up being his real favorite targets. But I like Myers in the situation and the offenses. And I really like his quarterback, quite frankly, more than I like Juju Smith's quarterback, given that he's got talented receivers around him. So I would pick Myers in this spot.
Andy, how do you feel about that? Jacoby Myers or Juju Smith-Schuster? Mac Jones, impressive in week one. Probably a little bit more impressive than what we saw from Ben Roethlisberger, but you couldn't have the wider on the spectrum in terms of experience. So Ben could bounce back in this spot in week two.
Right. And for Mac Jones, perfect fit for that Patriots offense. I think really the only landing spot where he could have been a true QB1. Everything just lines up perfectly. Now, if Jonnu Smith was 100% healthy, I might lean towards Juju in this one. Both demand a lot of targets, but the quarterback play, like we just talked about, I think is better right now from Mac Jones, and Jonnu's a bit banged up whether he plays or not. So I feel in this matchup versus the Jets, who organization-wise with under Robert Saleh, I feel are on the right track, but they still have a ways to go. So matchup-wise, I think you go Jacoby.
Like, is anyone on the Jets startable today against a Patriots defense when Bill Belichick just eats rookie quarterbacks for breakfast, right? Zach Wilson, he got better as the game went on last week, but he took 6 sacks, 10 hits. He said like felt like he got hit by a truck after game one. So when it comes to the Jets, is anyone there startable? Corey Davis, Zach Wilson, or do you stay away just based on who they're playing today? Andy.
Yeah, honestly, I think like maybe Corey Davis. Like if you got to take a Jet, I'll go with Corey Davis. Jamison Crowder looks like he's going to play coming off the groin injury, so you immediately, to me, take out Elijah Moore because Crowder will. So if Crowder was fully healthy, I'd say him, but him being worked back, running backs we don't want any part of. Not interested. So I think today, Corey Davis as like a WR3 if you got to do it, but otherwise try to fade on most Jets.
All right, Bill's got a question on Twitter, and we were talking about. I think we had a question earlier where we couldn't believe the options. So get ready for this one, okay? Bill on Twitter. DeAndre Swift, Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson. We got to pick 2 for a flex position. This is a half PPR league, so I'm going to read it to you again. DJ, I'll come to you. DeAndre Swift, Cooper Kupp, or Allen Robinson. You got to pick 2 for a flex, and again, it's a half PPR. An embarrassment of riches for Bill. Probably a 6-team league.
Bill, whoever's in the spot now, just take them. Like, go do your errands. You're good. You're fine. Like, man, those are all great options. I would, first of all, again, I'm loyal to the running back. I would take Swift. He looked really good week one. So when it's even, I'll take the back over the receiver. And then when it comes to Cooper Kupp and Robinson, it's tough for me to go against Cooper.
That's so hard. You see the beads of sweat dripping down DJ's forehead trying to make that.
Cooper had such a great week in week one. I might lean a bit to Robinson only because, we're hearing, that there might get a little bit more exotic with their playbook in Chicago this week. And so, I think they might take a couple more shots downfield. So maybe Robinson he's a bit more explosive than Cooper, but yeah, enjoy your Sunday. Barring an injury, you're having a nice week. And again, are you in a 2-person league? Like, how is your team?
Who are you playing?
Yeah, Andy, the options again: DeAndre Swift, Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson. You got to pick 2 for a flex, and it's half PPR. Who you taking there?
Geez, like get your ring size in for your championship ring at the end of the year. Oh man,
I love DeAndre. No running backs.
Right?
He went to 0 running back strategy for the first 7 rounds of the draft.
Has to be. And listen, I love DeAndre Swift. He was in my Sportsnet sleeper article coming in as a guy who I think has potential to be a top 8 running back now that it's a more stable position in Detroit. I love DeAndre Swift. We saw the target share last week, running the ball, catching the football was surprising the amount. But with this week, I just cannot get past the amount of work and the connection that Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford had. So I'm going to go with Kupp.
Circling back to Allen Robinson and the Bears, everybody, it seems like on earth, except for the Bears coaching staff, wants Justin Fields to take the reins. There are certain guys that you would expect to trot out every week, irrespective of the situation. Allen Robinson usually is one of them, unless you're in Bills League and you got to choose to put him on the bench or start him. But
right.
What are we expecting when the time does come? And we would expect the time to come where Justin Fields is going to take over to be relatively soon. But is there anyone that's sort of sleepy on that Bears offense that if Fields starts taking snaps under center, that you would want to keep your eye on? I'm thinking maybe like a Darnell Mooney type who can't take advantage of the situation right now with Andy Dalton because he's limited in how far down the field he throws. But if Justin Fields gets in there, there could be a higher ceiling for a lot of those Bears players. What are your thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, I think Mooney's the one to watch. I like Cole Kmet, but as long as Jimmy Graham's there, you cannot trust either of them. They just cannibalize each other. You can't do it. Cole Kmet's better next year. We'll see. Cole can never be concerned about because the quarterbacks, that poor man has had to deal with irrelevant, has been shocking. Andy Dalton actually might be the best quarterback. Look back at the quarterbacks he's played for. Andy Dalton.
Andy's breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I think
Andy's breaking up a little bit.
Andy's frozen, but I'll finish his sentence.
Yeah, go ahead.
Andy Dalton might be the best quarterback that that Robinson has played with, and that's why. I mean, I already like Robinson. You mentioned he's a guaranteed start, so certainly that would continue to be the case. But I like anybody on that offense, quite frankly, more if Justin Fields is the starter because they're going to be on the field more. They're going to be scoring more points. So give me more of Montgomery, even though Fields is more of a run threat and might take away some of the run game. I still want him on a productive offense. If you were someone who drafted Kmet and really like him, give me more of him. Give me more of anybody on that offense because I think, quite frankly, they're going to be a better offense once Fields takes over the reign. I'm not really in love with any of them, and I don't think as much as Matt Nagy might want to tell you this, that they're just going to become the Chiefs when Mahomes took over. But I like anyone more with Andy Dalton. You mentioned it, Jesse, as we have Andy back. This is probably a coaching decision where everyone in the world would play Fields over Dalton. I actually think this is a front office decision where they went out before the draft and signed Andy Dalton and said, "Yes, you will be our starter if you come here." And they're like, "Oh shoot, Fields kind of dropped to us. We got to take him." Right. And so they want to do right by the player and the agent out of respect. But there's going to be a point in this season where Matt Nagy looks around and says, "I need to keep my job. So I'm going to play the guy who energizes the entire locker room and opens up the playbook." And so how deep into that season it'll be, but when that time comes, I like any Bear you have on your roster more than I do now.
Yeah, I'm stashing a lot of Justin Fields, so I'm going to be ecstatic when the Bears front office and coaching staff, whoever's making that call, come to their senses. Andy, it's all good. That's what we have to deal with in 2021. Would you like to make a succinct point for what you were saying? You got broken up a little bit there.
Oh, yeah. I was saying Darnell Mooney as far as like a sleeper hold on to. But it's interesting to see whenever you have a rookie quarterback come in who does not immediately become a starter, quite often they have built chemistry with a secondary target. Baker Mayfield comes to mind. Him and Hollywood Higgins have a chemistry because both were backups when they came into the league that first year. So it's going to take, I think, some time to see who that develops. Might be a surprise type, but Darnell Mooney would be the only sort of stash that I would kind of be interested in holding on with.
Okay, a couple inactives rolling in here. Jamison Crowder, who was widely expected to be active, is actually inactive. I know it's not going to precipitate the response from Andy that Trey Sermon did last week, but still, that's a big name, relatively speaking. And Paris Campbell for the Colts is also inactive. So I know we were talking about, Andy, the Jets situation probably stray away from most Jets, but because Jamison Crowder was expected to play, now he's not expected to play. Does that give you any sort of lean towards maybe plugging Corey Davis back into a lineup, or even, I guess it doesn't really affect Zach Wilson, but any other receivers or running backs from the Jets that you now would plug into the lineup?
Running backs, no. Corey Davis, yes. But again, WR3 tops, and if it's a 2 wide receiver league, then a flex spot. I would still try to avoid the situation because we know Bill Belichick and rookie quarterbacks. Oof.
Yes.
Oof.
I'd rather not. Yes, good call. Can I give you another inactive that I think is going to be somewhat influential?
Let's hear it.
Jesse. Marshawn Lattimore, inactive for the Saints.
Defensive.
And defense. And here's why. We talked a little bit. There's a couple questions on the stream about Robbie Anderson. Really, really love Robbie Anderson in this spot with no Lattimore. Already had a great connection with Sam Darnold, and he is not only a possession guy for them, he's someone who stretches the field as well. So give me Robbie Anderson. And remember, this Saints team, who people are now in love with because they pounded the Packers, they're going to Carolina. They're without 7 coaches because of COVID. I think the -3 for New Orleans is a bit much. So I really like Carolina today, and I like me a lot of Robbie Anderson as well.
Yeah, a lot of people sleeping on the Panthers this year, but Sam Darnold looked a little bit better, sort of escaped the situation in New York, and he's got Christian McCaffrey to work with there. So they could be on the up and up in Carolina. Okay.
And he doesn't have Adam Gase, which is the most important.
Thank goodness.
No doubt. Okay, let's get back to questions here. I'm just going to call this person Gomper. I can't even pronounce it. So Gomper asks, Brandon Aiyuk or Devontae Parker? Now, this one is juicy because Brandon Aiyuk, a lot of people spent some draft capital on Brandon Aiyuk this year and did not pan out in any way, shape, or form. The 49ers coaching situation. Andy, Brandon Aiyuk or Devontae Parker today?
For this week, I will go with Devontae Parker. I really like Brandon Aiyuk, but the trouble to me was when he was drafted by San Francisco is that him and Deebo Samuel are so similar. Deebo Samuel was incredible last week. A target hog, was a playmaker, outperformed George Kittle as well as the top guy. Now you bring in Trey Sermon like we talked about earlier. I'd rather avoid Aiyuk until I see him get more than 0 targets in a game. I want to see how that gets worked in a little bit more. So I'll wait. I think the upside long-term for Aiyuk is there. I'm just going to go a little safer this week. Don't say Parker.
Yeah, DJ, what's going on with the Niners? We already discussed the Trey Sermon situation. Now it seems like Brandon Aiyuk is in the doghouse. What's the deal with Aiyuk, and would you start him, or would you start Devontae Parker in this spot?
They don't like players that they draft, evidently. Because players that they go and get in the draft, they don't prioritize and don't give reps. For me, it's Parker. And I know lots of fantasy owners for a while have some PTSD around Devontae Parker. When will he finally, reach his full potential? I see flashes every week. Can't figure out when should I play him. He caught a bunch of contested balls in week 1. He looked good. And there was lots of talk about the fact that Jalen Waddle would be their number 1 and steal some shares from Devontae Parker. And I do love me some Waddle, but Tua looked for Parker down the field. And so I think he's a safe play.
I want to talk a little bit about Tua and just his fantasy ceiling or his fantasy implications, because it seems like for the better part of his career now, it seems like he's become more of a game manager and either they don't let him throw the ball down the field, or he's choosing not to throw the ball down the field and he's trying to limit the turnovers. But until he decides to turn the ball downfield, how much of the upside is capped for any of these Dolphins players? Because if you're a Tua owner, you want him to just turn it loose, and it doesn't seem like that's something that the coaching staff or Tua has been willing to do. Andy?
Yeah, it's a very conservative approach under Brian Flores in Miami, and he had to do it when he came in, built through the defense, because it was a terrible team that he took over. I personally am not a believer in Tua long-term, but do I think he can do enough to make the pieces around him fantasy relevant? Yes, and in fairness to him, with that hip injury last year, I think they're just slowly opening up a little bit more and more of the playbook each week and ease him into it. So I don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to be opening it up and really letting it loose downfield. against a Buffalo team as well that has a pretty good defense. So I think we're going to see a little more dinking and dunking. Go for Waddle, odd hand off to Gaskin, and maybe that opens things up for a downfield play to Devontae Parker at some point. But I feel we're going to see conservative play calling for Tua as he grows into really his first full season as a healthy, unofficial rookie.
Right. DJ, is Jalen Waddle someone who has a bigger upside than many would think, just because of the nature of the way that the Miami Dolphins offense works? Like Andy said, there's going to be a lot of dinking and dunking. I know Will Fuller's not playing today, but the receiver core is a little bit crowded at times. But is Waddle someone who can sort of sneak under the radar there in the slot spot and rake a little bit here fantasy-wise?
Yeah, I think over time, a good comp would be, a souped up version of Henry Ruggs. And people were really, really excited, to have him last year. And it was a bit boom or bust where Jerry Jeudy was probably a bit of a safer play. And I think if we use that same comp for this generation of Alabama receivers, I think Devontae Smith is closer to Jerry Jeudy, great route runner, some more consistent player. I think, again, better. And I think, Waddle will give you some great moments, a great boom or bust, but given, the lack of, efficiency sometimes with that offense, you're not necessarily going to see it, week to week. I do, though, think that Miami are going to open it up more. I think it's been a focus, an emphasis this offseason. Let's go back to last year. Tua came in mid-season. They really made the change, to say we're going to turn over the franchise to him. But the play calling was still done by Chan Gailey, who is a grandfather. It was an offense that was made for Fitzpatrick and his talents and not Tua's. And they were honest and said, we didn't really change anything when we changed our quarterback, which is mind-blowing considering he's the future of your franchise. Right. Now they've got George Godsey and Eric Studsville as co-offensive coordinators. They've modernized the offense, and they've gone back and said, well, what did Tua do well at Alabama? And how can we implement that at this level? And a big piece of that was going and getting someone like Waddle for him. So I do think that over time, the offense in Miami is going to get more expansive and Tua will get better. He has some weapons offensively, so that's not going to be an issue. My bigger fear, really, and I know everyone's in love with Mac Jones, is he doesn't have Alabama skill position talent in New England. It's a bit better than it was for Cam, but the receivers he had at Alabama are literally better than the ones that he has in New England. So when the league starts to figure him out, I'm more concerned about Mac Jones later this year than I am Tua.
Very interesting. I think back to college, and Mac Jones sits in the pocket, but he can sling it, and Tua the same way. Like I remember back to those bowl games that Tua played in, and he would throw the ball downfield. He could turn it loose. There's a lot of people now saying Tua can't do it, but we've seen it. We've seen that he can do it. The difference, of course, is the Alabama offensive line was a lot different than what he has working. He's not going up against NFL defenders in college. Now he is. Waddle is included in this next question from Vinny Sent, who hits me up all the time on Tim and Friends, so shout out Vinny. Which wide receiver should I start? Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Chark, Jalen Waddle, or Rondale Moore? Let's go to Andy for this one.
I'm DJ Chark, Jacksonville, garbage time. You might not get the payoff until the fourth quarter, folks. It might look lean, but they threw it 51 times last week, and Coach Urban Meyer said he doesn't want to do that. Well, Jags are pretty bad. They might not have a choice but to do it. Chark is all the targets. Quite frankly, a lot of people got to eat. Laviska Shenault Jr., Marvin Jones as well. You had O'Shaughnessy, the tight end even. But Chark was the guy that Lawrence looked to first. And so I think you go with Chark there.
I love some Jacksonville receivers. We're not really sure what they're doing with their backfield right now. So give me some Jones. Give me some Chalk. Give me a junior, basically, including my son, Junior, who's chiming in. Apparently, he's putting in both guys in his fantasy team. I like both of those guys in this spot.
Daniel writes in on YouTube. This is Zach Wilson or Carson Wentz. I know. I'm a terrible fantasy player. So
yes, you are, Daniel.
So it seems like Daniel went pretty heavy, hopefully on wide receivers and running backs. this is a tough spot. I think what I will say about Zach Wilson is a lot of people were bullish on him after what Tony Romo had to say about him in the preseason, that he expects him in a little while to be in that top tier of quarterbacks. And when a guy of Tony Romo's stature says that about a quarterback, people are going to take notice and probably take Zach Wilson or expect things from Zach Wilson that they shouldn't otherwise. But in Daniel's case, he's got Zach Wilson or Carson Wentz going up against the Rams defense. DJ, who you taking there? It's a tough call.
I'm taking an Advil because that hurts my head just to think about it.
Can we boo Daniel? Boo!
Yeah, boo Daniel. Just give your $50 and say good luck, champion.
It's over.
I'm not winning. Carson Wentz. I like Zach Wilson more. In most weeks, I would say Zach Wilson. The last 10 rookie QBs to go against Bill Belichick, they're 1-9. So if you're in a survivor pool, this might be the week you want the Patriots. You don't want any Jets offensive players. As we said earlier, if you're just joining the stream. So I will take Carson Wentz, and I will just pray that he holds on to the ball and gets sacked and doesn't fumble it or throw picks, because I do think he will end up with more passing yards than Wilson will against Belichick.
Again, Paris Campbell is inactive and Michael Pittman Jr. is active today for Carson Wentz and the Indianapolis Colts. Andy, it's a tough call. DJ say takes an Advil. In this situation. Are you an Advil, Tylenol? Which one are you taking?
Oh.
And who are you taking when it comes to Wentz or Wilson?
Boy, if I'm Daniel, I think I'm just gonna have a sip of bourbon. I'm gonna pour a shot and deal with it that way. That is rough. I would honestly say check your waiver wire if Jared Goff is available. Earlier in the week, he was owned in about 39% of Yahoo leagues. I would honestly go drop one of those guys and go get Jared Goff and start him this week. If you have to pick one, I'll go with Donnovan and say Carson Wentz. I don't like it, but I think you go that way. But again, see if Jared Goff is there. Go to your waiver wire, see if Goff is there. The guy went 29 fantasy points last week. Weaker defense or let up defense or not, still went 29 fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be what the deal is with the Lions, you'd think, with Goff. If they're going to get down in a lot of these games, the Lions are going to have to turn it loose a little bit, and whether that means dinking and dunking, whatever it is, they're going to have a lot of pass attempts, and that should mean points for Jared Goff. Okay, sticking with quarterbacks, MVTV on YouTube says, should you start Matt Stafford or Jameis Winston this week? We talked about how bullish we are on Stafford in the Rams, but our boy Jameis got that LASIK eye surgery. Yes. 5 touchdown passes later. Looks like the real deal in New Orleans. So, Andy, who you going with, Stafford or Jameis this week?
I loved Jameis Winston. I love the story. It's a great redemption comeback story. He's so quotable. He's so much fun. My concern was the weird stat line where it was 5 touchdowns but less than 150 passing yards. Usually you throw 5 touchdowns, you're throwing for 400. So how is that offense going to develop? That concerns me a little bit. I want to see how this plays out. I think we saw day one what we know against with Matt Stafford. So it's going to be a tougher defense, but they just beat a tough defense, and he put up those numbers. I'll go Matt Stafford.
Deej.
Oh, it's got to be Stafford. You're not replicating most likely those 5 touchdowns, but the majority of his completions were 5 yards or less, right? Yeah. If you were watching Sportsnet Central and you saw him go over the top to Harris, that was not the entire story. So 148 yards. They thought they got rid of the check down Charlie when Drew Brees retired, but they're just doing the same thing with Jameis, evidently. And so there are very few quarterbacks week to week in fantasy that I would take this year over Matt Stafford. And Jameis, LASIK or not, is not one of them.
You mentioned Jameis dinking and dunking a little bit, short passes. It had an impact for sure on Marquez Callaway, who a lot of people were super high on coming out of the preseason. We saw those highlights from those preseason games of Jameis airing it downfield, but he did nothing in week 1. And is that just a game plan thing for week 1? Do you expect Marquez Callaway as the Saints' number 1 receiver, at least until Michael Thomas comes back? Andy, do you expect anything from Marquez Callaway moving forward, or is he someone that fantasy owners should just leave on the bench until we see something?
I think you leave him on the bench. I thought he was overhyped coming into this fantasy draft. I understand the reason why people were high on him. Personally, the only fantasy player I'm comfortable starting on the Saints right now is Alvin Kamara. And saying that, a guy I would look to pick up Juwan Johnson, who in Yahoo leagues has wide receiver and tight end eligibility. You get a little double dip there. He was looked quite often by Winston over the rookie Adam Troutman. So I think Juwan Johnson might be somebody. I'm not saying you start him this week, but grab him, keep him, see how that develops, because Jameis might be focusing more on that type of player that he can throw shorter over the middle passes to, rather than really stretching the field consistently with a Callaway.
I love that, and it's a great point by you, because you don't see that in fantasy football. That's a basketball thing, forward, center, right?
Yeah.
Point guard, shooting guard. But in football, you don't see that, because Travis Kelce is somewhere saying, hey, can I get a wide receiver tag, please? I'm putting up wide receiver numbers. But I do like John saying, I would say that Callaway is not the number one wide receiver on that team until Thomas gets back. Alvin Kamara is the number one wide receiver on that team. And Marquez Callaway is this year's version of someone who a bunch of people heard on podcasts had a good preseason. They didn't watch the preseason themselves.
Yes.
They drafted him not knowing that if they passed him on the street, what he would look like, and now are disappointed that he didn't have the week one that they were expecting because of the draft capital that gave up. I would, if you have Callaway, don't overreact, but I wouldn't be playing him for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, if you were just casual through the preseason and you saw Marquez Callaway's highlights, you're like, okay, I'm all in, right? I'm all in. And it didn't go so well in week one. Okay, Hasneet says on YouTube, asks on YouTube, Nelson Aguilar or Cole Beasley, which is a good question. Seems like Aguilar has sort of carved out that WR2 role in New England, whereas Beasley was soaking up a ton of targets yesterday or last week. So Andy, Nelson Aguilar or Cole Beasley for you?
I'll go Nelson Aguilar. I'm not trusting Mr. Novaks. Sorry, Beasley. Sorry. No. There was a lot of targets there. I feel we're going to see a more tuned in Buffalo Bills team. I think they just got away from themselves a little bit. Maybe they bought into the hype, the offseason hype. They were crowned. The second half, they let it get away from Pittsburgh. Cole Beasley, he could still see a share fair of targets, but you have Emmanuel Sanders brought in. You have Stephon Diggs. Gabriel Davis is going to play as well. There's that little committee in the backfield. And, of course, Josh Allen himself can call his own number and go. So, yeah, I'm not loving Beasley in that spot.
Yeah, I'm taking Aguilar as well. I might reconsider if it's PPR just because of the volume that Buffalo is throwing. 51 attempts for Josh Allen in week one. But other than that, Aguilar is going to give you a much higher percentage of getting into the end zone, which is really what you want. And so I like Aguilar in that spot.
I mean, guys, we got to be frank here. This is a big bounce back spot for Josh Allen and the Bills, is it not? Because this is a guy who eats against the Miami Dolphins, or has eaten against the Dolphins so far in his career. Didn't go great in week one. A lot of people sort of bearish after week one, but that seems to me like a bit of an overreaction. This is a guy who is an MVP bet, a solid MVP vet ahead of the regular season. So, Deej, are we expecting big things from Josh Allen and the rest of the Bills offense today? You mentioned his 51 passing attempts. There's a high ceiling for Josh Allen. There always will be.
Yeah, and I think it's a good bounce back spot. They are on the road at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. But when you look at what Pittsburgh did, when you look at the tape, they rushed 4, dropped everyone into the coverage, and still were able to get pressure with 4. So you're talking about getting pressure with 4 against 5 offensive linemen and a back. There's not many teams who can do it. Pittsburgh happens to be one. When you spend that money on TJ Watt, it's because he's going to take care of the front end, and your back end is going to take care of things. Miami is actually built entirely differently. They've spent their money in their back end, in their secondary. So they're not going to be able to get the type of pressure on Josh Allen unless they blitz. You know who one of the best QBs in football, aside from Patrick Mahomes, on beating the blitz? Josh Allen. So if you're looking for someone to bounce back this week, Miami is a good defense in their own right, but stylistically, they're not going to be able to replicate what Pittsburgh did to get Buffalo off. And remember, Pittsburgh had the entire offseason to look at what Buffalo did successfully, scheme up against it with Mike Tomlin. Miami is also familiar with them because they play them twice a year. But Josh Allen has had success when he's played Miami. So I like Buffalo and Allen in that offense to bounce back this week.
Andy, you agree with that? Big bounce back spot for Josh Allen this week?
Yeah, and I know we got to wrap, guys. But yeah, it's for Josh Allen. I'm not expecting gaudy numbers, because I think Brian Flores and his defensive mindset
Mhm.
has just got that Miami team so tuned in, has done such a great job. But certainly they're going to be looking to send a statement. And to Donovan's point, I think we're going to see a lot of running of the football. And if they try to blitz, well, Josh Allen's going to burn you. So I think the Bills win. And it's a good game for Josh Allen, but not. I don't see, let's say, a 4 or 5 touchdown game and go for 400 yards. I think it'll be a little lower than that because of the Dolphins D.
All right, boys, clearly we could sit here and we could do this for hours, if not days. But unfortunately, we got to wrap. So everyone out there, Andy, you enjoy the Cleveland Browns here in week 2. DJ,
Yes.
you enjoy the Dallas Cowboys. Things are looking up for the Cowboys. The star is shining bright. I'm going to enjoy my bets. I'm going to enjoy my fantasy just like everybody else out there. If you guys want to continue to ask your questions, hit us up on Twitter. You have our handles right there. We'll be back next week with more from Sportsnet's NFL Fantasy Playbook. So again, thank you, Andy. Thank you, Donnovan. And thanks to all of you for watching.